My name is Anita Villarreal, and I'm the ESEA State Coordinator for the Texas Education Agency. And on behalf of the National Association of Title I Directors, I would like to welcome Katie Garner. Katie Garner is a nationally recognized educational researcher, speaker, consultant, and author whose practical classroom applications of the latest neurosurgery on literacy acquisition and instruction has gained national recognition with the No Child Left Behind, RTI, and Reading First initiatives. As a regularly featured and keynote speaker at educational conferences, Katie works with schools and school administrators alike with cutting-edge innovations for successfully aligning their existing literacy curriculum and instruction with the most current neural research on teaching and learning. Her backdoor to the brain approach to critical literacy skill acquisition, as presented at Harvard, has been heralded as literally teaching teachers a new way to teach, and is currently the focus of a professional development book series with the Stenhouse Publishing on brain-based instructional literacy methods targeting how we learn best. Please help me in welcoming Katie Garner.
Thank you. And thank you for helping get all that organized. Thank you. And I will if I can. Oh, that's okay. Thank you. And just a real quick word about your handout so that you know where it is and how to access it. And thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I just want to make sure I don't forget to mention this. Your handout's about 40 pages, and it is going to be accessible on the website that you will find on this red sheet. I apologize I don't have it in hand, but it's just the weight of such packets with such large presentations isn't feasible. But you can go to this website. You will download it from the workshop page. So when you get to that website, there's all kinds of things you can meander around and look at that will really flesh out a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, from the research to the application. Everything from video clips to the actual writing samples that I keep talking about. They're actually all on there in leveled grouping so that you can get a kind of a schema of what we'll be using them for. But for the handout, if you go to the workshop page, you're going to see a schedule of everywhere that I would be speaking, and just to the right at the top, there is a little icon that says Handout Download. If you click on that, it will start to download a very large graphic file that will take a good bit of time if you have an old computer to process and download. I'll also warn you that it's in color, which means that if you are a teacher and not an administrator, and you are only allotted 1 or 2 color inkjets per year, you might not want to press print unless you set it to black and white first, because it will suck up your entire color inkjet because there is so much of a background of red. You might want to go back and reprint certain things in color, but you're not going to need necessarily, let's say, PowerPoint slides, you know, in color. So that's just a quick word of warning. Also, a place for some really good extension information and just some little tricks in terms of brain-based learning across subject areas. If you go to the Facebook page, which I think is on the back of this, facebook.com, you'll see not just a lot of teacher dialogue and administrator dialogue, but you'll also see some updates that I try to do that are just really fabulous pieces of brain application that is on the cutting edge cusp, not yet in book form, but yet known about and would be of tremendous value to us to be able to align something that's maybe a little bit tricky for kids to grasp, and we can just line it up in a way where they can just take it. Whether it's math, whether it's science, whether it's a really, you know, like the most recent one was a really neat little program that Apple was playing around with as a precursor or as a prototype to Siri, the talking little girl on your not talking little girl, the talking woman on your phone, your iPhone, if you have an iPhone. That was something that they played around with as far as expression, breathing in pauses where there are periods, commas, having the person that's actually hidden in your Mac. It's kind of a tricky thing to find where this is accessible, but if you go to the Facebook page, it'll explain it. I had heard about this from a Mac expert who was sharing this with teachers at a conference once Siri had come out. So it's a little hidden feature inside your Mac that for teachers, if we know it's there, or for administrators to be able to guide teachers to utilize it, there are 1,001 applications for it in the classroom that really can generate almost another teacher in terms of a lot of what we are trying to get across when it comes to literacy. So just little snippets like that I think that either I found out about that would be really valuable or that are so new that it might take a while to work their way into a textbook. I will tell you, if you don't click like, it will not update you when new things are added, and it's very random when things are added. So that's just one more thing to mention. And I think, and they are also doing and I don't know in this group it would be as useful, but they will do, they meaning the site, they typically, whatever conference that I am speaking at, they will identify anybody that writes on the page. I saw you at, the Title I conference. They will take just those from that particular conference and then draw out one, or in this case, since I'm presenting twice, 2 names, and then provide them with some extension pieces of material for use. So that's another thing. If you not just click like, but you actually just say, hey, I saw you, it was great, the lights were bright, whatever you want to say, then that will kind of enter you in for that. It's usually more useful when you're not in a group of 1,000, but your odds aren't as good. The only other thing that I can think of to tell you if you've just walked in is make sure if you go to your browser and you do enter in the secret stories that you have the word the. Because if you forget the word the and you just type in secret stories, www.secretstories.com, you will get a red flag on your computer. And it will probably be firewall blocked, but it also does alert someone somewhere downtown, especially if you do it over and over and over again, trying to figure out why it's not working. So if you just want to enter secret stories, then go to Google, because you can do that and it'll be the first thing that pops up. But if you actually go to the browser, make sure you type the secret stories, okay? And I don't even go to the browser because I inherently always make that mistake. So I just go to Google. All right, and welcome, and I'm happy you're here. And I am Katie, and I am hopefully going to share in just this bit of time that we have, which isn't very long, some information about some of the research that we have that we can take and plop into a content area that currently is very much in opposition of the way the brain learns. And by research, I'm talking about brain research. And content area that's in opposition of the way the brain learns, I'm talking about reading, writing, and spelling. The biggest issue with reading, writing, and spelling is that there is no inherent meaning in why the letters, the patterns, and the sounds do what they do. Anytime you don't have something that you can explain that just makes sense, you are fighting against the current of the brain. The brain demands some connection to what it already knows and what it's presented with as reliable or predictable. And it wants to be able to take what it's already owning as far as its patterns and click that together with new patterns that it's able to identify. If those two things don't correlate, you get a big disconnect. And you don't get the, oh, because that's the sound that you get when everything fits perfectly. When you know what you know, and whatever it is you see fits perfectly with what you already know to be true, that's when you've just acquired new information, because it makes perfect sense. You immediately own it because it makes perfect sense given what you already knew to start with. When you're told something that doesn't fit with what you know it's supposed to be, that's when you have a dilemma. It doesn't just make sense. It's not just immediately owned. If that information is still to be owned, you have to work to get it, which means use it or lose it. That's the information that's disconnected to whatever personal knowledge, understanding, or interest that we have. Whether it's a class that you took in college that you had no interest in, but you had to take it, whether it is the table of elements for a chemistry test that you have to replicate, whatever it is that has no personal meaning or logical explanation is relegated to a different way of being learned, and that is use it or lose it, repetitious practice. Now that's kind of the bane of our existence and the cause for this unlevel playing field when it comes to our kids that can read and that can write proficiently. Because we have a lot of kids that we know will not get the necessary repetitious practice, used time with these skills. And the brain, if it doesn't use it, it's going to lose it. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about why that's so intense from a different perspective, because we're actually going to hit some ground that you've probably never hit before and never thought of before, because it's just almost the opposite way of thinking that you could almost not even have if you're in the education system on a regular basis. We get very conditioned to work with the situation at hand, and we don't often ask a lot about why, because often what we're given to work with is just what we're given to work with. So thinking out of the box sometimes is a little tricky. We have more of a cyclical approach in education. Because the box is so tight with regard to what our options sometimes can be, we have to spin around a lot within the same parameters and reinvent the wheel within that context. We're going to actually leave that box by using some of this brain research that we're going to talk about. And the brain research that we're going to focus on is medical brain research that can just be used for extremely valuable educational purposes. We're also going to focus more not on how to do what the brain does, but how to cheat the system. Because the brain is a system, and if you know what it's going to do and what causes it to do it, then you know how to get around the pitfalls that we already know exist if you've been in a classroom with kids. Now, I do want to make sure I have some kind of an idea of position and grade and work. So raise your hand if you are actively teaching with K or first. Okay, wow. Okay, raise your hand if you are actively teaching with second or third. Okay, you guys seem like the kids now, because I know the lights are bright, but it looks like some of the same people keep raising their hand over and over again. Raise your hand if you work with 4 or 5, fourth or fifth. Okay, and then above that, but with ESL or kids that may have some holes in skill ability. Okay, raise your hand if you are not necessarily with a class, but you still involve yourself with the class for purposes of skill acquisition, reading coach, instructional specialist, etc. Okay, and then raise your hand if you're just the person that has to do everything because you're the administrator, so you're just the jack of all trades that runs around doing everything else that's there. Okay, good. So I swear, though, it does look like about a third of you raised your hand for every single thing that I said, but. Okay, but that gives me a good kind of a skewed perspective. Then what I'm going to do is kind of set this up, just assuming that some of us may not realize how completely illogical are letters and sounds and patterns, which basically make up the code of what will become a learner's ability to read for meaning and write for purpose. What makes up this code is so illogical that it's amazing that the learners don't call us on the carpet over it. And here's an example of that. Now, if you're in the classroom, you might know this example, but we're conditioned not to really have bells and whistles go off when we have to contradict ourselves with it. So this, to me, is one of the best examples. We will tell kids, Y says yo, yo, yeah, 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 and then we will proceed to read them a book that is by a certain author. And it's often a big book at the earliest grade levels, so there's a big B and a big Y, and yet we just said this book is by Shel Silverstein. Then we, of course, have the calendar, and the calendar is an integral part of your day on a regular basis. We see words like January, February, May, July, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So there's that letter again that we said is going to say Y, and it says E, and it says A, and it says I, and then they look at the boys, bathroom, so now it says oi. Now we have words like mommy, candy, daddy. Those are some of our hot button words in early grades. I mean, you can't write one single sentence without having mommy, daddy, candy, something like that along those lines. Every single time they turn around, they are going to see Y doing something completely different from the one thing we tell them they can expect it to do. Because when we do this little song, Y says yo, yo, yeah, 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 we don't break out then into an explanation of all of the other variations of sound that you might find it making depending upon the position it takes in a word. We don't do that. We give them this to use as their weapon of attack if they see a symbol that looks like a Y. But then we proceed to do everything other than that, because really, the only real pattern you can walk away as far as Y goes with is knowing that of all the sounds it makes, and it can make them all, actually it can make every sound except U as far as the vowels go. It won't say you, but it is the first letter in the word you. The one thing you can count on it not doing almost ever is saying yeah. So if you actually want a pattern to keep and to own and to count on, it will not say yeah. Because unless the words yellow, yes, you, or yak, you're pretty hard pressed to find a K1 or 2 level word that has a Y saying yeah. Now, there's a good reason that we don't explain the most likely sound for Y, and that is it would not be developmentally appropriate for the audience that we're speaking to, because really it's quite the tricky conversation. You know, Y says yeah, but not when it's at the end. When it's at the end, it says E or I, unless you put an E with it, and then it says A. Except when it doesn't, because sometimes EY can actually say E, but most of the time EY is going to say A. So if you wanted to just say E, do not put the E, just put the Y. But keep in mind, if you do that, it could say I. Now, if you want it to say A, one thing you can count on is just to put the A next to it, and that's good, that's easy, but keep in mind if you put the E next to it, that also could make it say A, except when it doesn't, because sometimes it won't. It will just say E. But if you're writing, boys and girls, and you want the E sound at the end of a word, do not put an E. Put a Y. And keep in mind that it might be EY, but most often it wouldn't, because then it would just say A again. Now, time for snack. You would never have the ability to have a conversation like that with the learners that actually are experiencing these discrepancies on the front line. That's just one example of 300,000 that occur in terms of all the little combinations of patterns, letters, and sounds, where these letters jump off that alphabet train into real words and all bets are off. They sit so neatly when they're up there on the wall, and A says A, and B says B, and C says K, but not when they come into words. When those letters rub up against other letters, it's like in a little electrical current, everything changes, and all of a sudden a completely unrelated sound can emerge. Now, what's amazing is learners go against their very nature by not calling us on the carpet every time we contradict ourselves, because it has to sound like we're just lying. I mean, we say one thing, and then we turn around and say something else, then we turn around and say something else, and we never address it or say, isn't this weird that I just finished telling you this, and then I turned right around and said that? That is not in their nature. You know, if you've been around learners, especially at the elementary grade levels, long enough, if you say lemon cupcakes will be here at 11:30 on Thursday, and they will have a cherry on top. If those cupcakes do not have a cherry on top, if those cupcakes are vanilla and they're not lemon, if those cupcakes don't come on Thursday because your husband didn't listen to you, so he said he'd pick them up and give them to you tomorrow, what's the big deal? They know what they're supposed to get, when it's supposed to come, who gets to pass it out, who passes it out if that person's absent. They are like little tape recorders. They are creatures of habit to the point of obsession, and our substitutes can account for this best, because they will make sure that that substitute knows exactly what is supposed to occur in your absence, exactly the way that it occurs when you're there. So the fact that they would just turn off the bells and whistles when we crisscross what we say on a constant basis with letters and sounds shows you that they have identified a pattern when it comes to letters and sounds. And the pattern is, there is no pattern. Anything goes. Nothing she says would surprise me. She could tell me that A says pla, she could tell me that Z says qua. Absolutely nothing she tells me will make me bat an eyelash or ask a question, because in this world of letters and sounds and patterns, anything goes. Now, what that pretty much does is it turns off their analysis, their analytical, diagnostic problem solving. You know, it's kind of like going to the doctor when you're feeling like something's not right, and when you walk in his office, he's got his hands over his ears and his eyes closed. He's never going to be in a diagnostic mode if he's not aware of what it is he sees to know what might look like it's a little off, what seems a little out of the norm. In order for something to seem out of the norm, there has to be a norm. There has to be some predictable entity in order to know when something doesn't look right. If it never looks right, then it's kind of like the teacher at your school or the friend down the block who their behavior is so erratic that you wouldn't know if it's a, let me give this example. If there's a particular person that you are in contact with who is always a certain way, always perky, always happy, always friendly, and she's completely despondent on a particular day, you will be scanning through all of the possibilities that it could account for that type of behavior, because it's so out of the norm. And that is what our brains will constantly do. Our brains are forever seeking out patterns that it's able to identify in randomness. And if it's able to identify something that looks predictable to a certain degree, and our brain doesn't like odds like 6 out of 10. It likes 8 out of 10 or more. If it's 6 out of 10, it's not quite reliable enough to own and to keep and to use as an expected outcome. Our brains are going to search patterns or search randomness, identify patterns, and then try very hard to connect the patterns it's identified. Like Sally seems despondent 3 times I've seen her today, and she looks like she's been crying. Plus she hasn't said hello, and she always says hello. This seems like a pattern now. It's not just one time I saw Sally. It's 3 times, and every time she seems this way. Now I'm going to try to spin it through and connect it with what I already know to be true to come up with a diagnostic option, and I'm going to analyze what I see and figure out how it fits together with what I know it's supposed to look like or what I know to be true of this person. Maybe she's getting a divorce, maybe she's sick, maybe she just got really terrible news and she doesn't want to tell anyone. I'm spinning through all the patterns that I'm aware of that could account for the behavior that I see. Now, if, however, the person whose behavior seemed off is the person whose behavior's off on a daily basis. One day she's happy, one day she's mad, one day she's sad, one day she's, not sad, one day she's angry, one day she's Mary Poppins. Then you don't have any bells or whistles go off when something occurs because the norm is anything goes. It's not that you're not concerned about it, it's just that nothing seems to really spark your intrigue because that is the norm. And this is really where that sense of complacency and total lack of problem solving, almost passiveness in learning, seems to overtake all of the activities that involve manipulating text at the earlier grade levels. It's very difficult then to get them to turn back on that critical thinking when it's off for such a large percentage of the day, because you really read and write and spell throughout about 80% of your day in the K2 grade levels. You're doing it across the curriculum on a constant basis. So you don't want that long of a time to have your brain best served in the off position. And typically, with these letters and sounds, you are better served to keep your brain in the off position. Because if you think about it too hard, you'll be very frustrated, because there isn't any logical explanation. We tell kids, T says turtle, t, t, t. But if you went to Las Vegas and had $100 and had to put your money on whether you could pick up a book, any book in the entire city, look at any page in that book and see the letter that looks like this, going t or the most, which would you put your money on? Seeing it go t the most, or seeing it go the most? Because unless the book's about Tommy and his turtle trotting to Toronto, you will see words like this, they, them, those, the, 10 to 1. Now, as an adult, and this is where our brains tend to rationalize, we're thinking, but that's because that's not a T, that's a TH, so that's a ridiculous example. I'm only 5, I don't know what the H is yet, we haven't gotten there, or maybe we did and I wasn't listening, but all I know is there's a letter that looks like this, and she tells me go tuh, and I do it every time I go tuh, and I'm always wrong, but she never goes tuh. I don't know why she tells me to go tuh, because she sees a word that letter looks like this, she puts her tongue out, and I don't know what she does or what sound it is, but whatever it is, that's what she always does when she sees it, but I don't, because I just go tuh, because that's what she said to do. So the TH makes perfect sense to us as a logical way to differentiate, but when a learner is kind of coming on board with these skills, everything they see is the most likely thwarted by everything they are given as a tool to attack it with. Now, if we follow this line of thought, the reason this occurs so prevalently, especially at the earlier grade levels, and I'm going to get to the upper grade levels in a minute, is because of how we have to chunk off the curriculum. Now, I'm going to actually be talking about something that extends all the way up to high school, because these strategies are to give you a way in literally a split second to put into place skill base that should have been there years back. Whether you have an early grade learner that you're trying to thwart how we do what we do, or an upper grade learner that has so many holes in their skill ability that they are not a proficient reader or writer. Either way, when you're going through the back door of the brain, you have a whole different set of power tools to work with. Now, if I follow that, I say that only because I want to make sure that I don't lose my upper grade, because I'm talking early, but we're bringing it up. If you follow this line of thought and you think about how we teach these skills, we have split them apart as if they were math skills, as if you learn this so that you're prepared to learn that, and then once you've mastered this concept, you're ready to build onto that, the next one. In other words, we need to know number sense before we start adding. You have to know what 5 looks like. 5 apples, this is 5, this is the number 5, this is what 5 looks like. I have to know that before I can take 3 away or add 4 more to it. And I don't want to teach a class to divide if they haven't necessarily learned to multiply. We're not going to use algebraic equations until they know what the X stands for, which means they have to have concepts of numbers. You're not going to use large numbers like 346 until they have some sort of a figurative perspective of how large that would actually be, because by that point you cannot use manipulatives. Math is an easy content to stack skills and neatly allow the K teacher to do this. First grade teacher can pick up here and run with it, and then up comes the second grade teacher who can then take them from here and move them onward. Reading, writing, and spelling doesn't work that way. You are given typically the individual letter sounds at the kindergarten level plus some sight words. First grade's supposed to pick up with blends and some digraphs, a th, a sh, a ch, whatever that might be. Second grade comes in with vowel combinations, higher level patterns. Better all be finished, done, and ready to go, because by third grade, they're done learning to read. They have to be ready to read to learn. Now, that's the ideal. We know that that's not the case. Third grade, you've got half your kids. You know, ideally it's a hump. You learn to read in K1-2 so you can read to learn in 3-4-5. Curriculum doesn't offer any opportunity to teach kids how to read after second grade. Everything they do that involves reading and writing third grade on is reading for a purpose. Drawing an inference, making a prediction, pulling data from text. It is not about how to read in third grade. So you're supposed to be finished over and done with learning how to read in preparation to take on the tasks that third grade requires, which is using that reading ability, that writing ability for other skill purposes. Now, we've got a whole lot of kids that are stuck on the hump that are doing both at the same time. They are still kind of learning to read and finishing that up while they're also on the carpet to read to learn. If you're trying to attack the word mountain and you're going you're never going to be in the place mentally where you need to be to answer the actual question, which is, why did the character in the story bring her dog back to the mountaintop where her mother had passed away 4 years ago? What do you think the cause of that trip was? You're just trying to figure out what the word mountain is. So you've got a lot of kids that get worlds away from where the goal of learning is supposed to be because they're stuck like a time trap in kind of the middle of all these skills and not having ownership deep enough in the gut to get on with what the real purpose at hand is supposed to be in those grade levels. Now, the kids whose backpacks get zipped up in the earliest grades and then they don't see the light of day again until they come back to the classroom, and the teacher unzips it and she sees that nothing's been touched at all, those are the kids that are going to really be on the low end of that playing field. Because if these skills require meaning in order to just be understood and owned, and we don't have that to offer, they have to go down the other chute of learning for the brain, and that is what we said, repetitious practice. Now, we can pick out the kids in kindergarten who are not going to get the time on task other than their time with us, 1 on 20 or 30. The time with us will be the only time they're going to have in terms of getting access to those skills. And if that's not enough, then of course they go onward through those grade levels. So we can so easily pick out the kids because of this content requiring the repetitious practice that we know many of our kids are not going to get. And those are the kids that we sometimes get the most concerned about. Now, I'm going to dramatize this little example, and then we're going to use Einstein's logic to turn everything upside down and change the facts so that we have a whole different way of working. I will tell you that the research base that we're tapping into is going to be brain plasticity. And although, because this is a shorter session, I don't get to spend as much time on the actual research end of it, and I usually like to really give you the good method to the madness, because I think your madness carries more weight if you know why you're doing what you're doing, so you can tweak it and make it your own. I am going to give you enough to be able to do that, but it's a very interesting concept that we're going to be aligning what we're talking about to, and I will tell you that on the website, a very fast, quick read that gives you a great kind of a pool of wiggle room for thinking and for application is on this front page of the website. It's in the Educational Elementary Principal Journal for, I think this was Texas, the TEPSA, Texas Elementary School Principals Journal. I am going to be at the National Elementary School Principals Conference doing an institute, and I believe this is going to be coming out in one of their journals sometime in the spring. I don't know what the month is, but you can download it right now on the site, and it gives a really good snapshot of what the research is that we're digging into to take and run with into the classroom. And if you don't know what brain plasticity is, we're going to talk about it a little bit after I dramatize this. But for the most part, it is the brain being able to naturally rewire and reconfigure itself so as to get around the areas that are not functioning as they should be and tap into the areas that are to take over the burden of those tasks. So if you have had a stroke and you have lost a certain area of functioning, your brain will naturally recircuit itself. And that means that an area of the brain that is not supposed to, let's say, be responsible for processing numbers will all of a sudden take on and reconnect and rewire those capabilities that area that is supposed to be processing numbers, abstract numbers. For instance, if I started to give you a long equation, if I just randomly tossed out some numbers, 8,300 minus 4,200 divided by 6. Even though I'm not telling you to compute this or put this computation to task, you will have a part of your brain that immediately perks up and knows that its job is what is being tossed out. It's kind of like a factory with lots of foremen in it, and the foremen are very unionized in that each knows what it's supposed to do and what it is not supposed to do, and it is a very clear-cut line as to whose is what job. So my job is processing numbers. That's what I do. I do it immediately. The moment I even hear something that sounds like a number, I'm on it. Now, if that part of your brain is no longer capable of functioning, then by default, you should lose all number sense. But what the brain will naturally do is recircuit itself so that the language center takes on responsibility, let's say, for the number area. It will reinvent how it works with what needs to get done. Now, it's not always an ideal situation, but it makes the best of what it has. When you look at what is happening naturally and what makes it happen, and you see how we can play around with it, there are certain tricks in terms of how you wrap up the content that you're kind of putting out that allow you to trick the brain before you've even started to get a particular area to process something that it's not supposed to be processing. Now, for our learners, for learners of all ages, that's key, because we have a lot of students who have areas in the brain that are glitchy. Whether it's because they're an early grade learner and there's some developmental delays or just developmental readiness issues. You can't teach to something that's not there. And yet we are constantly then waiting and waiting for readiness. You can't wait for a stroke victim to be ready. If that stroke victim has lost their language center processing capability, you cannot say, well, we'll reteach her language, she's not ready yet. She'll never be ready because that part of her brain's gone. So the research that's been done was to see how we can take this natural process, because for a long time we didn't know the brain could do this. We didn't realize that we knew in terms of the mapping where things were processed and what was done in what part, but what we didn't know is that the brain can, within that structure, reconnect itself. You've heard the term probably what's used together is fused together. As you connect certain things, you have different pathways that can pull together. Now, for our learners, early grade, we said developmental. It's a great, great perk to be able to get around an area that's not ready to go and tap into an area that is, and let that area process what the other area isn't ready to do. Because then you're not a slave to the readiness of little Gwendolyn, who may go through your class half the year before she's finally ready to do what your curriculum said you had to do on the 13th of August. Or if you're in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 9th grade, if you've got a learner that's struggling with the ability to proficiently read and write, there are some issues, whether it's processing delays, whether it's just lapse of information at an earlier grade level and then working with minimal information trying to continue onward. You've got some things, some holes, some glitches, some processing quirks that you've got to get around, some areas that you're going to have to circumvent in order to get things to go where they need to go. So it's invaluable information how to trick the brain into doing what it does naturally, but 10 times faster. Because just like a bank, if you know, and this is going to sound terrible, but if you know the system of the bank, you are able then to manipulate it. Meaning, like, if you're a bank robber, you're not going to rob the bank when the bank is open. You're going to know when the alarm goes off, when the safe closes, when the store person leaves, when the, alarm sounds, where the alarm system is set. You know the system, and then you know how to get around the system and work within it. And that's, to me, where the brain research is the most intriguing, is if I know the brain is going to do this, then I'm going to do that. It's not so much to do to align with what the brain, how the brain learns, which of course is a given, but it's also to take advantage of what the brain will do by default so that we can get around some of these pitfalls that are just the bane of our existence as teachers, because they are the struggles that we all have with kids. So cheating the brain, to me, is some of the most fun strategy work. And I'm going to demonstrate it right now. Pretend for just a minute, and I'm going to use the lowest functioning level learners in this little example that I could possibly conjure up, which would be first day kindergartners. Because no matter how low your 6th grader seems in terms of the gaping holes in skill ability that Johnny comes in and presents with, he cannot be any more clueless than learners on the first day of kindergarten. Because they don't know who they are, where they are, what they're doing, who you are. They are lost in space. Now, the reason that this is a good place to look at impact is because if you can impact learners at this level, with this background knowledge, and with this ability to manipulate their thinking and analyze, then you can do a world of good for Johnny, who has got to be farther along than what I'm about to demonstrate, which again are first day kindergartners. Now, some of you are not aware, perhaps, of what the first day in kindergarten can look like. So if you have no idea at all what type of bedlam is actually occurring in that room, please raise your hand. Never even walked by a window, taken a peek, and taken pity on whoever was stuck in that room. I mean, you have no idea okay. It is like nothing you have probably ever seen before. You have criers, you have runners, you have screamers. The runners, by the way, are not the runners that take the notes. They're the runners that want to escape. So you have got to make sure that kids stay in the classroom because they come into you hysterical and they want to leave. Now, you have to have a lot of adults in the room. So if you're an administrator, typically you are somewhere in the kindergarten hallway. So if you're a teacher in an upper grade level who has looked for some administrator on the first day of school, you can take your pick if you go to the kindergarten hallway. You'll have the counselor, principal, assistant principal. If anybody from the district accidentally wanders in, they're going to be grabbed and put down there because we need rock/restrainers. And the rock/restrainers are the ones that do the nice, gentle kind of sit on my lap and I'll rock you until I know that you're not going to try to escape anymore, which is so important. And it's not just on the inside of the classroom, it's on the outside too, because we have mommies who are also crying, screaming, and trying to escape, but into the classroom instead of out. So you've got a lot of things going on, and all throughout it, you are trying to make sure that everybody's got what they need, that you know who's having lunch, who can't go home with dad, who's got peanuts, who can't see mom. Can't ask these questions because they don't have the ability to know they're supposed to answer. So if you ask a question, you will just either get everybody's hand up for everything you say, or you'll just get the where they don't even register, they've heard the question, and I always thought they'd make great CIA spies because you don't even know if they are speaking the language that you're asking the questions in. You get not even a glimmer of awareness that there's something that you're asking them to give you. So you've got to go around and do all this with your backpack investigation. Now, by the time all this is said and done, it's about 9:40. Because it's taken you this long to go through everybody's backpack, to get everybody calmed down. You have no more administrators in your room because your criers have stopped crying, they've fallen asleep. But you are ready to start teaching because you had on your lesson plan that at 8:15 you'd begin this lesson, but that, even though you knew that would be impossible, but your administrator refuses to let you write the word chaos from 8:15 until 9:40. So you do go ahead and put down all these other things that you would do if you didn't have this situation. But because it is 9:40 and lunch is going to be at 10:05, because it's an overcrowded school, you don't have a lot of time to actually get underway. You do have to start something, though, academic, because you had a phone call from Johnny's mom who told you he's gifted, came through the office. She wants him placed in another classroom, third, second, she'll let you decide, but not kindergarten. So you're going to have to call her, and before you can do that, you have to have some idea of what he actually can do. So you've got the calendar up here, and you are ready to just kind of gauge Johnny, feel him out. Now, this occurs with any level text, and this is exactly, in a nutshell, the problem with reading, writing, and spelling, and we're going to show how to fix it. Johnny looks up at the board, and he does a great job using the skills he's got thus far, which actually are pretty darn good. He goes, a-ga-ust. Now, no matter what grade level you teach, no matter what level of text you're working with, you will have kids come to a word, attack it with every skill they have, and either because there's a pattern they do not recognize, or the natural quirks of our language in terms of how things are pronounced, they will not be able to get the word, even though they didn't do anything wrong per se. And that's a very frustrating position for a teacher to be in, because we like to be able to take what we would look at as a teachable moment, which typically that's what that is. I've done everything you've given me, I've employed every skill I have, I've attacked this to the best of my ability, and I've done everything right, but I hit a wall. Normally that means they're waiting for the next tool that you can give them to move one step further, break down that barrier, and not need you the next time it comes about. And then they're on their way, they get to go, oh, and then they go through that word armed with that tool that they didn't have before, ready to attack the next. Not in reading, writing, and spelling. We don't have those kind of teachable moments. You will never hear a kid, when you tell them how to say a word or why it's spelled a certain way, go, oh, okay, I get it, because there is nothing to get. There is absolutely nothing to get. The satisfaction that would come with that sound, that only comes when you're able to connect what you know to something else that you have been able to perceive as a pattern. That does not happen in language with that inherent meaning in terms of letters and sounds and patterns. So you don't get that. What we typically do is direct them on the path to knowing that we will have lots of opportunity to repeat this practice, so you'll get it as we gain experience using this pattern and this skill. Two different choices here as a teacher to make. One would be what typically you'd see a teacher do at kindergarten level. Johnny, you did a great job. I love the way you attacked that word. And by the way, imagine I'm in 4th grade and we're looking at a word like industrial, or industrious. It can be any level text. It doesn't matter. You did a great job. I love the way you sounded out that word. You really did a super job. Now, actually, the word is August, but way to go. You're a really good reader. Now, if Johnny's truly gifted, or he's just not been around school long enough to catch on to the mantra of it just is, it just does, you just have to remember, he might actually call me on the carpet and say, well, why? Why would it be August? Because that doesn't make any sense. A goes and A goes A, and U goes and it goes U, but O is what goes on. There's not an O in that word. Plus, did you know O could go O too? But anyway, it doesn't matter because it's not even up there. And so how is that word August? Now, he's laid out on a platter all the patterns that he owns thus far that pertain to this. He simply wants us to connect what we've just tossed out as gospel to what he already is darn sure is the case. He's been on this earth for 5 years. He's got books at home about acorns, apricots, octopus, umbrellas, unicorns, oak trees. He knows what he knows. Plus, he knows Mom put a note pinned to his chest that told you that he was gifted because she wasn't so sure about you anyway. So if he has to make a call here as to what to toss and what to keep, because he can't let both coexist in his brain because they contradict each other. If he's got to make a call, he's going to go with what he knows to be the case and just kind of put off in the periphery this thing that you said that doesn't seem to make a hill of beans worth of sense to him. Now, if you do what typically in kindergarten or 1st grade we might, when we're not ready to teach a particular skill like this, you might say, you know what, that's okay, I don't want you to worry about it, you're right about everything you said, but I do assure you this word is August, but I will tell you guys by the end of August we will have done this calendar 45 times, you will know this word like that, don't even worry about it, and for now let's clap it so we can get it to stick in our brain. Ready? August, August, August. Okay, who wants to be my line leader? And we kind of just scoot through it. Now, if you're in 2nd grade, or if you even say, no, I would give them the phonemic explanation. Why would I do that? There's a perfectly good reason for this. Why would I just scoot by it and pretend it's not there? I would tell them about the AU. Here is how that would pan out from a brain-based end. If you say, Johnny, it's because A, and you say, ah. Johnny goes, oh, okay. Then later he sees the word awful. Now, you said AU goes, this doesn't have AU. How come this goes, Yeah, Johnny, it doesn't have to be U. W can do it too. Oh, then he walks around, he sees the word father. Now, okay, you said the U and the W, the AU, AW go but this doesn't have the U or the W. How come it goes They don't really have to be there. It doesn't matter. You can't do that if you want the brain to latch onto it. If the brain gets crisscrossed too many times, it puts it in the pile of, okay, there is no pattern to this. There is no pattern to this. I don't have any way to really. The brain is like a bookie, and I do not gamble. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with gambling, but I don't. But I would say that the brain isn't just like a normal gambler that's looking for better than average odds. The brain is like a bookie that has to get so much better than average odds that the payoff is good if it's just barely above average. So that's how high the threshold is for the brain to take it, to own it, to keep it, and to use it as an expected, anticipated pattern. It is not going to take something in that only works 7 times out of 10. It's going to chalk that up to, So all of this to say, if you try to teach the phonemic explanation, you still are going in a way that requires the learner to have repetitive practice in order to make it stick. Now, we're going to flip this around. And by the way, phonics in general is the only thing, before we switch this, because we're going to use Einstein's logic to do the equivalent of what I like to think of as time travel. But before we time travel, in this world that we're in right now, the only way that we have to provide meaning when it comes to these codes of sounds and symbols is phonics. And phonics is not inherently meaningful. Now, this was a Title I conference that I had said this at about 2 years ago, and one of the evaluations I got with a little exclamation point at the end. So if whoever did that, if you're out here, listen, because I meant to say the word inherent and I didn't. So it was an interesting call on my part, or their part on me. I said reading and writing and sounds and symbols there's no meaning to the language. I meant inherent meaning. Phonics is not inherent meaning. Phonics is an academic principle upon which our language is based. It is an organizational structure that we have created. It's kind of like, diagramming a sentence. It gives you a good perspective of how things pan out, how they fall. Scientific law would be inherent meaning. If I drop this and it falls, if I drop this and it falls, if I pick up Johnny and ask the class what's going to happen if I drop him, they all know he's going to fall. Nobody had to study that. If I say I'm going to give you a test tomorrow, I'm going to pick up something in this room tomorrow, and I'm going to hold it high, and you're going to have to write down what's going to happen to it. Nobody would have to put in their planner what's going to happen to it. Nobody has to sneak into your classroom late at night and practice dropping everything in there just in case you pick up an object you've never dropped before. There is an inherent understanding of exactly what to expect, no practice necessary. Your high kids are not going to score any better than your low kids on what's going to happen when I drop this. Now, the fact that I call that process gravity, that's an abstract academic principle. That requires repetitious practice. That goes in the realm of use it or lose it. The only kids who will be able to give me the word gravity on the test will be the ones who have either used that term often enough at home or went home and practiced it in their little planner, said it 5 times and tried to remember what it was. That is not inherently meaningful. You don't just get that it's gravity. You go to Germany, they call it something else. You go to Switzerland, they call it something else. So that is not something that provides meaning. That is just something that we use for our purposes, whatever they may be. Phonics in general is really has never been intended to use as a stepping stone to teaching reading. We have to use it that way because it's all we got. Now, we actually are going to time travel, so we'll have something else. But in general, that is the only system we have to break apart what's going on in our language. But phonics really, and you know this if you've ever looked at a phonics book that's 300 pages long, and some of the rules apply to words that are 3 syllables, and then you turn a page that's a rule that applies to only, like, say, maybe 4 words, and those words are so multisyllabic that if you didn't read, you would never have any way to know what those words were anyway. They're words that you as an adult can read, but the rule doesn't apply to needing to know how to read. And the ironic part is, you turn the page, you look at the exceptions. I've always wondered how they could have a page with 9 exceptions to a rule that only applies to 6 words. But you see it all the time in a phonics book. You'll see a rule, you'll see 4 words that apply to it, and they're very long words. You turn the page, and there are 7 exceptions to the rule with only 4 words. And wouldn't you think then they'd have to flip it and make the one the exception and the other the rule? So anyway, but it's not meant for teaching reading. It's meant as a reflection. It's best served in terms of its purpose to use to look back on our language, the structure of it, and how things are coming together. Diagramming a sentence is very similar. You don't diagram a sentence before you learn to write one. You diagram a sentence to see how you put it together, what you can do if you want to take it apart, twist it around a little bit, and reconfigure it. It takes a little bit of knowledge and savvy to appreciate what diagramming a sentence is for. It is not something that a beginning sentence writer would get much out of, because it's actually more difficult to diagram a sentence than it is to write a sentence. And phonics can sometimes be like that. It's more difficult to explain the why and all the different things it can do based on where it is in a particular word and what letters happen to be with it than it is to just try to remember the word. So it's a very perfect content to shift from absolute opposite of the way the brain learns to completely in line with it, because it's a night and day difference. Now that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it right now. Einstein has, okay, I don't know how that one got there. Einstein has 2 quotes, more than that actually, but 2 that we're going to talk about. And I know that I am going to be going just a tad over, but so that I am on the right time zone, time-wise, somebody tell me exactly how long I'm supposed to have left? Okay, thank you. First quote you've heard, probably. We can't solve problems by using the same thinking that was used when those problems came about. That's the cyclical thinking. That's trying to take something that we know is an issue and work around the issue. There's no logical explanation to provide to kids, so it's really difficult for them to know what sounds and patterns and symbols are going to be doing when it comes to reading and spelling. So we have to practice. So since we have to practice, let's come up with a fun way to practice. I know, look at this really cool video game. They get to stomp on the blend and it makes the sound, or they get to do a somersault every time they hear a vowel combination, or we try to work within the system of the problems. We have no way to just have it make sense, so we have to resign ourselves to practice. So let's try to come up with 1,001 ways to make the practice more fun. We work with the situation as if the situation is the unchangeable part. Now, I love his second quote more because nobody ever gives it to us as educators. I think it's because it sounds so unethical. And at first glance it does, but if you look deeper, it actually gives you the path to fix a lot of problems that seem unsolvable. If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. Now, it sounds like what this means is formulate your hypothesis, see if it's true. You know, like if you say, okay, 80% of our kids are going to score a 4 or higher on this test, and then only 60% of your kids scored a 4 or higher, don't change your hypothesis to, okay, next year we're going to say 70%. Just change the facts and say 80% scored a 4 or higher. That's what it sounds like it's saying. We don't change facts in education. Facts are what you have to work around. The facts are what you're stuck with. You have these are the facts. This is what we have to deal with. And you sit at a table as a team and you say, we have less funding, we have no bus drivers this year, we have no cafeteria staff this year. However, we need to feed the kids and get them to school. So, given these facts, the best I can come up with is 2nd and 3rd grade, you're cooking the meals. 1st and 5th, you're driving the buses. Now, I am open to suggestions if you have them, as long as you keep in mind we have no additional funds and we have no cafeteria staff and no bus drivers. These are the facts. Please suggest anything if you have any better ideas. The facts don't get to change because often in education it's a hierarchy that causes us not to be in charge of the facts. But there's some facts that we are in charge of because there's some facts that aren't scientific law. There are some facts that are just the way they are because we said so. And those are the facts we can play with. Now, we're going to do this to Johnny right now with this word August. Because keep in mind, the fact that's killing us here is there's no logical explanation to give Johnny, so he has to just remember it. And Johnny will, because Johnny's high. Johnny's going to do everything we tell him to do, and his mom will probably do 10 times more. It's Lulu who's asleep as you're talking right now. She's the one who's going to really be up a hill trying to capture information if there's nothing other than practice that's going to get her there. Johnny. Let's see if I have my little poster here, and then I don't have to use that. Johnny. I love the way you attacked this word because it tells me that you absolutely know these great letters and sounds, and I am amazed that you could know them so well. But here's the thing. There's a grown-up reading and writing secret in this word August that you don't know. Now, you're just a kid. You have a kid-sized brain. I'm an adult. I have an adult-sized brain, which means my brain can hold a lot more. I have to be careful if I tell you one of these grown-up reading and writing secrets, because if I tell you before your brain is ready, your brain could explode. Now, I really do say that, but I promise there is a significant motivational factor for it, and it's to turn things around, bring back the why. That'll make more sense as you look at what you'll be reading afterward, your packet. If I can, I'll toss it out at the end. But if you do teach kindergarten, you may not want to say that because you will set your criers back off. So, grain of salt, but it is a pivotal, there's a pivotal turn that occurs when you say that once I get through this, I'll try to touch on. Otherwise, you'll be able to read it. Now, I'm going to tell you guys this secret because I can tell already that you're ready for this grown-up secret, and you know how I know? You're awake. The ones that are asleep, they're not ready. Do not tell them because we can't be sure they're ready for it. So I mean it. You are not to tell anybody these secrets, except you can tell, of course, adults. Although I will tell you, they've forgotten them all because only teachers were given the ability to remember all the secrets. Grown-ups know how to read and they know how to write, but they don't know why they know how to read and write. That's why when you say to mom, why is my name spelled this way? She'll go, I don't know, it just is. She really doesn't know. Or when you say, Mom, why is this word spelled this way? I don't know, honey. I don't know. It just is. And they almost get frustrated. It's because they don't know why they know, because they forgot their secrets. But I know them all. So I will tell you that right here in this word, there are 2 letters that are in love. And I mean head over heels, huge, huge crush on each other. A and U. And it's actually, they're not the only ones in love. A and W are also in love. And you have a picture, by the way, on your little handout of a lot of these. Anytime these letters have to stand like right up against each other in a word, side by side, like just right together, they get so embarrassed that they always put their heads down and go, ah, ah, and that is the sound they make. And it's not just in the word August. Look over here. Awesome. Awful, autumn. Look at all the words where this grown-up reading and writing secret is. Now, if you didn't know this grown-up reading and writing secret, you'd think this word was awful, or awesome, or atom, and you'd have to go, Mom, I can't read this word. But see, now you know the grown-up reading and writing secret. Now, what this lets Johnny do is something that normally he could never do in this content area, which is go, ah! Okay, now, here's the interesting part, though. He does what you would expect him to do. He walks to lunch, he sees the fire extinguisher on the wall, he sees the word automatic underneath it, and he's already off and using the tool going, look, I can read this word now. automatic. Automatic. See, I read it automatic because the secret's in that word. He's doing just what he should be as the teacher who knew he was ready for that next piece. What the research shows that's most fascinating is it's Lulu who's the most important person to give this to, and she is still asleep. We, as teachers who think like waitresses in terms of, okay, who's ready, who needs some more drinks, okay, they're ready for their appetizer. Don't bring that main meal out yet, they're not ready for it. They just barely started that appetizer. Let's give them a little bit of time. We're supposed to make sure everybody's got something to chew on at all times. Nobody's overwhelmed with more than they can handle, but yet nobody's starving or dehydrating in your section. You should not have somebody sitting around forever with their glass empty because you don't know how long it's been empty. That's why waiters and waitresses that are really good, and my husband used to wait tables in grad school, so he's the one who told me this, because you know how they overload you with liquid constantly? And you feel guilty leaving the table with a whole nother glass of soda or water when you didn't even want it to start with? It's because if they wait until it's below halfway full, they don't know how long you've had no water. So in other words, if it's empty by the time they refill it, unless they're sitting there watching you the whole time, they don't know if it's empty and it's just been like that for 2 minutes, or if it's empty and you haven't had anything to drink for 20 minutes. If they always are there to refill it before it's empty, then they can guarantee that at no point will you not have what you need when you need it. They will never be putting you in a position where you're ready for the next thing and you're just sitting there stagnating. They also, of course, try not to bring out all the courses at one time because you can't even enjoy what you're trying to do, which is to eat, if you are overwhelmed. So a good teacher usually is very astute about who's ready for what, who needs to go back, who's where you are, where you were, where you need to go. And every single person is an individual table. Now in early grades, K2, you are like a blind waitress. Because you, and I'm going to say what you are in 3rd, 5th, you're a whole different kind of waitress. But in K2, you're a blind waitress because you can't scan the room and see whose glass is half empty. You have to get up close and put your finger in their water to see whose glass is half empty. And the reason is you can't just give a test on Friday, see who got the concept, and then if they didn't, regroup your reading groups and do it Monday. They don't do that in K1, 2. You want to get an assessment that's valid of who's got what you taught? One-on-one assessments. 10 minutes at a kid at least, and you're lucky to get maybe 4 or 5 in a year per kid. So to be able to spend that much time one-on-one with a kid, that means you can't just, 2nd grade, 3rd grade teacher, you give a test on Friday, see how they fared, regroup accordingly, and then Monday you're back on track. That's very different from what K1, 2 has to do. So it is like being a blind waitress. A blind waitress, there's going to be an inherent delay. Because even if she never stops giving you water, she's only, like I was just with you, you were fine, you had water. I'm only in the 11th person's water right now with my finger, so I'm sorry you drank all that, but I still have 20 more people I have to put my finger in their water before I could get back to you, and that's if I never stop moving. And that is the case with assessments in the early grade levels. You might find that a light bulb went off, and you're assessing them in March, and you're wondering, when did this light bulb go off? Because I haven't assessed you since like the end of December, and you were pretty clueless back then, so had I known that you would come so far so fast, I would have had you in this group. When did this happen? When did everything start to make sense to you, Susie? So it's a tricky thing to be able to be exactly where you need to be with regard to giving them the next piece with reading, writing, and spelling in the early grades. Upper grades, you're like a waitress at 2 restaurants on opposite sides of town. Because I was just in a 4th grade classroom where there were 7 years of reading level variation in one 4th grade classroom, and she was the non-formally identified room. She had the kids that didn't qualify for anything, gifted or special services. So to have 7 years of reading level variation in one 4th grade regular performing, no modifications on testing class, that is a job. How do you make sure that you can challenge the kids that are at that 7th grade level without leaving in the dust the kids on the 1st grade level? How do you try to challenge the 1st grade level kids without just completely boring the socks off your 7th grade group? Legitimately, you'd have to split yourself into 7 different pieces, 24 hours every single day, if you were really going to give everybody something to chew on at all times so that everybody got to stretch simultaneously. It's a very tricky task. Now, we're going to shift that all around because this is all going to kind of be killing all the birds with one stone as I show you what happens with Lulu. Lulu was asleep because Lulu had cried all morning, and Lulu doesn't have any idea what a letter is if it fell off the wall and hit her on the head. So this conversation normally is not going to spark much interest. No matter how old Lulu is, letters and sounds don't spark much interest anyway. These are not things that are personally relevant to kids. So the ones that typically will pay attention are the ones who really care about getting a good grade. It's a tricky content area to get a lot of interest in. When they can write, it's its own reward. When they can read, it's its own reward. When they're learning how to read and they're learning how to write, it's not so much its own reward. A lot of kids will put their blood, sweat, and tears into something that they're trying to write, and they still, when they're done, can't read it. And they have to come up to us and say, could you tell me what I wrote here? And of course, our logical thinking is, honey, if you don't know what it says, how would I know what it says? But actually, they're the ones who are thinking more straight, because think about it, we told them, they were up front from the get-go. They said, hey, listen, I don't know any letters, or I don't know how to write this. I have no idea how to, we said, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and put down whatever you think. That's fine. Just do whatever you can do. So they did, with the assumption that we weren't just sending them off on a wild goose chase. They thought once they did that, we, as the reader, because see, they think we can read, because they see us holding paper, looking at it, and making noise with our mouth all the time. They think reading means you hold it and say it. Writing means I hold the pencil and do this. I could write the name tags and still think it's about my puppy. Writing just means the pencil moves while it's in my hand. Reading means she makes noise while she holds the paper. So I wrote it, I did my part of the deal, you read it. And they don't understand when we say, well, I can't read it, honey, because they're thinking, then what the heck did you make me sit down and write it all for? I told you I couldn't write, so why did you have me do it if at the end of the day, nobody here would be able to read it? What we know that makes sense to us is we can only read what's written in the language that we speak, which requires letters and sounds, but we're making a big jump in assumption to think they know that. Just like they don't know the TH is what says th, they just know the T does. Same idea with what a reader and a writer is. They think we're the readers, they're the writers. Now, I say all of this, and I'm a little off task with having shared that, so I apologize. Because now I'm trying to remember where I was headed before I got off task. Well, Lulu, thank you. Okay, that's, see, I'm just mirroring Lulu. Okay, Lulu woke up because she heard you say, "Aww," and she thought that you were talking about her and how cute she was when she slept. Now, that is a powerful tool because the brain loves novelty. So anything that comes out of left field unexpected will immediately prompt immediate attentive focus, not even consciously. You could actually be trying not to listen. Kids sometimes will do this when you're telling them something they don't want to know, but if all of a sudden it becomes something that's a secret, you'll see those hands loosen up and you'll see those ears come forward. Anything that happens that's out of the norm will get immediate, focused, attentive concentration. If you have, and by the way, it could be a pitch inflection, like "aww." It could be an extreme body movement, anything at all that comes out of left field. Upper grade kids often need to be pulled back on track because the farther away they are from wherever your instructional level is in the course of your regular day, the more likely they tune you out at numerous times during the day. Because when it doesn't apply to them, and you usually come and tell them what their work is going to be because their work's never the same as everybody else's, they sometimes go on autopilot during the rest of the talking that you do. So it's a way, like a remote control, to have to get immediate brain attention. Now, Lulu only looked up because she heard us say "ah," and when she did, she saw us holding up a picture, which I don't have it in front of me right now, but let's say it looks like this, and it's this, except it's red. And she heard me say "ah." Now, what research shows that she can do that is fascinating is immediately connect this pattern to the symbol that I'm holding up. And I hate that I'm holding up the wrong one, so I apologize. I'm going to pretend it's this one so I don't confuse you. Mine is somewhere. Okay. She can do two things. I could 5 minutes later, or 10 minutes later, or even after lunch, say, "Lulu, what sound do these letters make?" Now keep in mind, she does not have any idea what letters are. She'll go, "ah," because she remembers they're in love. Now, you might say, well, but that's because there are hearts, and that's how she knew. It doesn't matter, because the visual acuity, what the research shows is that the visual acuity that she begins building from day one, probably 2 years before she would normally even look at something like this for the first time. Her visual acuity means it's her ability to recognize it as a pattern or an entity that exists. The fact that she then is prompted to give a sound that actually is the exact sound that if she were reading we would want to come out of her mouth instantaneously is an added perk. Now that is mimicking what soon or later will become reading. We can reverse that by saying, "Lulu, go point to the letters that go ah," and she can immediately take that sound and identify that symbol. Now that's the precursor to what will become writing. This is the sound I need. What symbols do I want to decode it or to encode it? We're running her through the rigors of something that she's not developmentally ready to use for a purpose, and that's perfectly fine. What we're doing is we're cheating the brain in such a way that we are using her social emotive center to transmit this skill of sound to symbol, symbol to sound. And we're killing a bunch of birds with one stone. The first one we're killing is recognition of the pattern to start with. You know, when kids see a K, they don't see it as one long stick with two slightly smaller catty-cornered sticks jutting out of the bottom half. They just see that pattern and know it's K. They know it goes K. We want these other patterns to be just as recognizable like the back of their hand. We want these to be like the faces of the kids that have been in their kindergarten class and somehow by luck of the draw have been in their classroom every single year all the way up through 3rd grade. We want them to see them coming a mile away and not when they're on top of them in text. Because we've got 4th and 5th graders, and in this 4th grade class I was talking about, when I was in there I was supposed to be modeling a lesson. I had done a workshop for the staff. I'd separated out K2 for one day, 3-5 for another. This was a follow-up to having done that about 2 or 3 months later for in-class modeling. And actually it was about 2 months later, and I think we had done the workshop at the end of the school year before. So this was maybe a month or so into school. And this little guy was looking at water cycle words on the board. It was 4th grade, no identification, no special services of any sort. He's reading a word like condensation or something along those lines, and he got to the end, he's going ata I an, because he read each sound. And the teacher said, no, wait a minute. You know what ATION says. And he went, oh yeah, no, Asian. I just didn't see it, Asian. Now, for a 4th grader with that many years under his belt, to not see that ATION pop off before he even gets close to the wall, he should see that pattern coming at him like a car with headlights. To get so into the sounding out of that word and just have that whole entire pattern go unnoticed, what that shows you is that's a relatively new entity for him to recognize. He probably, like Lulu, you know, struggled through kindergarten, knew some of the letters, some of the sounds, was barely able to be promoted, and then over the summer forgot a lot of what allowed him to get promoted, and then started 1st grade. Then the 1st grade teacher came running down to kindergarten to yell at the kindergarten teacher to say, why did you promote this child? He does not have half of his letter sounds even, let alone blending anything or sight words. Teacher says, well, he did, I promise. We worked like crazy with him last year. He barely, by the skin of his teeth, had him, but he did have them. So 1st grade goes back, reteaches everything that he didn't have from kindergarten, which means he's now starting 2nd grade and he's barely got his 1st grade skills intact. So now 2nd grade basically has to do everything else that's left over because 3rd grade, they got to be ready to read. Learning to read's over, reading to learn begins. So you either have to dump a whole bunch of stuff they're not ready for on them in that 1 year, or you say, I'll give them what they're ready for as they're ready for it, and we may be working into 3rd grade with these reading skills. We may still be introducing certain skills long into 3rd grade, because I can throw them all at him if you want me to in 2nd, but he's totally not ready for them. He's just starting to blend basic letter sounds and vowels. Now, any way you cut it, this is really bad. He needs, or she needs, either one, they need to have that immediate familiarity, that intimate awareness that they're right there and they'd see them coming a mile away, day one. There's no reason they can't have it. And here's what's really neat, and this is where I'm going to go forward. This is the part to me that I think is the most fascinating. In order for a learner to know that he knows something, in order for a learner to own information that doesn't just make sense, there is a recipe that has to occur. And this is what you have to do with any content, and this is all in your packet so you don't have to worry about writing it. Any content that you need to own that doesn't just make sense, and by make sense I mean let you go, oh, I get it. Like, let's say the table of elements, you're in a college class, you've got to replicate that table of elements and write it out for the class on Monday morning. Frequency, this is how you would study it at home. How often are you going to have to sit with that book and study that table of elements before you're successfully able to replicate it for your test? You might be blessed, you could do it twice, you got it, you're ready to head out on Friday and enjoy your weekend. You might have to sit with that textbook every 2 hours on the 2-hour mark and do it all weekend in order to visit it enough to have some semblance of what it looks like in your head. Duration, how long does it take you to wrap your head around it to start with? We have some kids who can start on the task before we finish the directions. That's how much time they need to understand it. Other kids, you could explain it 10 times, 10 different ways, and then send them out with a volunteer, and then pair them up for peer tutoring, and still the next day it's like they've never even heard it before. So duration, how many times do you have to have it presented to you? How long does it take for you to utilize it in that time that it's presented? And then modality, how hell-bent are you in having to have it shared with you in a certain way? Do you have to see it? Do you have to hear it? You know, if you don't speak English, then someone teaching you verbally is going to have no bearing on you. The more flexible you are with information working its way in, the better off you are. The more specific you are to how something has to be presented in order for you to process it, the more difficult you're going to have. Now, the problem is, by default, the kids that need the most of these things are the ones that get the least. The kids that need the most frequent use of a skill for the longest amount of time in order to get their head around it and are the most specific in how they need it presented are the ones who are not Johnny. Johnny, you could tell him something one time, takes him 2 seconds, and it doesn't matter whether you say it, show it, or do it, he's going to just get it like that. Lulu, you've got to work with her every single day. You have to spend at least 20 minutes at a time, just because to get her focused on what you're doing takes the first 5. And if she's not right there with you holding your hand, her eyes are everywhere other than where she needs to be. Now, Lulu goes home and nobody is doing anything with her. Johnny goes home, mom's going over all the work, she's doing all of his homework, she's putting on puppet shows to extend our lesson. He's getting more frequency, more duration, and more variations of practice than anybody would need, and yet he's the one who is successful. Lulu is the one who needs all of those things in greater amounts, and she's getting the least. Now, that's not the mind-shattering part. The mind-shattering part is we 10 times compound this in the classroom, because we give the kids that are ready for skills those skills first, which makes sense, right? So we give Johnny, he's already on day 1 of kindergarten using this, I call this incubating. He's incubating that AUAW, they're in love, day 1. He's going down the hallway, he sees it, he's practicing identifying that sound, that word's automatic. He's already off and running with this incubation process. Lulu's not going to start this incubation process normally until she's ready to use those sounds and skills to read with. That might be 2nd grade. Now, who needs the most practice, most frequent use for the longest amount of time in the most varied opportunities of modality? Lulu. Who's getting him? Johnny. Johnny gets to incubate from day 1 of kindergarten. Do you know what the frequency will be of his use of that skill from day 1 of kindergarten all the way up till 3rd grade when he's got to read to learn? 10 times over anything he could ever need. Duration, 3 years. Modality, every which way you could possibly come up with. Susie is the one who actually needs to have the time, and she'll be lucky to have it thrown at her the minute before she hits 3rd grade, because she won't be ready to get it in K. She certainly is not going to be ready in 1st. She probably won't even be ready in 2nd, but you got to give it to her sometime before she's got to be able to read everything. So the kids, by the skin of their teeth, like the kid that went at to it, it's like these are brand new things that they just get introduced to at the last possible minute, because they are. Because they were. And that's why 4th and 5th grade teachers will have kids that it's almost like they're inexplicable holes in what they can't do. It's just a random empty spot intermittently in their skill base. If we have the ability to give them something before they need to use it, it's a godsend, because here's what happens with Lulu. And by the way, individual letters and sounds, this is a side, before I show you Lulu as me, she will know her individual letters and sounds, as will everybody. If you teach early grades or ESL, the letters and sounds are not done with processing. The whole idea is to get around the weak areas of the brain. Processing is not your friend in the early grade levels. Processing is not necessarily your friend in the upper grade levels if you struggle with delays. Not that you don't want to exercise processing, you do. But you don't want to rely on that as a factor in order to get skills to go in. If you have another way to get around what's weak and tap into what's strong, that's the goal. So the individual letters and sounds are done with motor memory. Motor memory is using muscle memory. It's a whole different way of doing things that doesn't require the kid to know the bathroom from a hole in the wall. I mean, literally, it is allowing kids to own, to almost eat the individual letters and sounds, so that, and it takes 2 weeks to 2 months and you're done, finished, which is ideal, because at the same time you're doing that, things can come up in context to allow you to share a secret. There is a secret for anything that happens in the language 5 times or more. If anything happens in the English language 5 times or more, that makes it a pattern, enough possibility that the brain will run across it and need to know what it's looking at. So if you're simultaneously tossing out secrets while you're hammering in these letters and sounds with motor memory, kids are manipulating throughout every activity ongoing anyway. The more you have, the more you can bring to the table for reading and writing activities in kindergarten, in 1st grade, if you're trying to make up for lost time in 4th grade. So all of it's kind of, it's almost like a, everything's in context. Nothing is done for the purpose of hitting a certain skill. Whatever it is you are doing in your existing curriculum, in your existing instruction, looking for opportunities to explain the skill they need in order to do it and to own it, and then to have the ability to do it without you. Now I'm jumping into that a little bit before I finish this, but this is why this is important. I'm going to demonstrate Lulu about 2 months into school and reading a word, which is going to be August, and I want you to know why she knows her individual letter sounds, because some teachers might be thinking, well, how's she demonstrating this? Lulu would be the one who wouldn't even know 4 letters at this point, so how would she be doing this? 2 weeks to 2 months, it's finished. So, but that's not the point of what I'm going to demonstrate, but I wanted you to know that, because here's Lulu. August. August. Okay, good job, sweetie, but I have a question. Do you see any secrets in that word? Now, she's looking up there. Pretend that they're all up there. Oh, and when I say that, all I mean is, do you see any letters in this word that are also up there on that wall? And by the up there on that wall, I mean, you know, as you maybe have tossed out a secret, you've got the picture, and you'll see those in your packet. A-U. Okay, good job. But they love each other. Go, ah. Okay, so here we go. Let's try to read that word again, okay? August. Okay, sweetheart, but remember what you told me. You said you saw a secret in this word. Do you remember? Now, if she looks back up there again, that is a good chance that you are dealing with a kid who might have some short-term memory glitches. If she gets equally excited the second time she sees it as she was the first and goes, A-U-A-W. If she seems like, you know, that's kind of like the every day is a new day in Lulu's head syndrome. That's where, and you know, you've got kids like this where it's like it never just happened and you're imagining it, because when they see it again, it's as if it's the very first time every single day. So you question, you say, okay, so what did you tell me they're gonna do? They go, ah, because they love each other, and go, ah. Okay, so let's try to read this word again, okay? And remember, that's what you told me. My brother loves somebody too. He's gonna get married to her probably in the summer. Okay, honey, I need you to focus for me, all right? August. Now, here's what's going on. She thinks you have ADD because to her, there is no connection between these two activities. You seem to have this loop going on. You want her to read the word, which she did, and then you wanted her to tell you if there was a secret. She said yes. You asked her what it was. She told you. Then you wanted her to read the word again. So she did, and then you wanted to know a secret again. So then she told you. She tried to break your obsessive cycle by talking about her sister and how she was going to get married. You'd have none of it. You went right back to the word. She's not developmentally there yet to see that that's the key to unlock this door. She's just not there yet, and there's not a darn thing you can do about that, because developmentally, she will grasp that cause and effect when she's ready. But it doesn't mean we had to wait to give her the skill that she needs. She's already got the key in her pocket. She just didn't do what Johnny did with it. Johnny took the key out of your hand and used it to unlock the door he couldn't get into as he walked to lunch 5 seconds after being given the key. Lulu took the key, because this is what's so key, no pun intended, this is what's so key about this. When you tossed out that they were in love and this is what they do, it was the same as saying you cannot be the line leader because you hit Johnny over the head. There's not a kid in the class who couldn't go home and tell their parents why the line leader is no longer allowed to be the line leader. Their social emotive center is strong and at an expert level of performance. They know every single aspect when it comes to social emotive cues and dynamics in the classroom. That is the hot stove route. That is the part that develops first, and your brain develops back to front. The front is not always all there yet. If you can use the tracks that the social emotive cues use, how I feel when you're mean to me, how we treat him because he's always mean and hits people, so we make choices not to stand by him in line or else we get hit. I don't have to practice not to stand by him. I don't have to remember what he looks like. One slug from him and I know I'm best served to stand a kid behind him. So it's that kind of thinking that we're going to use. We're going to take advantage of those highways neurologically, instead of waiting for Lulu to build the highway that's supposed to process this information, because that would require a whole bunch of other information to be built in there first. And we don't want to have to do that. We know she's going to need the most frequency for the longest amount of time. Now, what's she doing if she's not reading? She's going from sound to symbol, symbol to town, telling you the secret, knowing what it looks like. It's almost like a buffet. We're tossing out a buffet. There's a ton of bountiful food. She just wants her peanut butter. Doesn't mean she doesn't know where everything is on that buffet, what it looks like, what it's supposed to be like, what food group it fits in. She could be a great hostess. She loves to put plates together of broccoli and squash and pickles. She can identify lots of things. Doesn't mean she has any desire to eat any of them. So eating it is using it. Johnny's voraciously swallowing everything you give him. Lulu's just owning her awareness of what it is, what it does, and where it's at. When she's ready to eat it, she will, but she gets to decide that. But the moment she's ready, it's right there for the taking, as is a bunch of other ones that you've tossed out. Now, here's what happens when she gets it. Because right now, the key is just this shiny metal thing that goes clink, clink with the other shiny metal things that you've given her, and she loves the way they sound in her pocket when she skips. And every now and then, they're fun to put in her mouth. That's the purpose they serve to her at this point. When she's ready to see the purpose, she'll look like this. August, because the ones that are in love are the ones that are in the word August, because they love each other, but they are in the word August. I get it. Now, when that bell goes off, she already owns all the keys now. She gets that the key unlocks the door. So now it's just a matter of putting the keys in the doors that unlock them. She doesn't have to relearn how to use those keys for every door. Normally, the moment that we would actually give her the first key would be when she's able to read that. Meaning, normally, you wouldn't give her the AUAW sound until she was ready to read an AUAW word. That is way too late. That is the kid that got lumped in your class 2 days before school let out. He's in your room the next year, and you don't even recognize him if he fell on you because you've only seen him twice. We need these to be an ingrained part of the woodwork from day one, coming up in context, tossed out on the buffet, ready for the taking the minute you're ready to take it. Their light bulb goes off, they go get what they want. I call it, and this is where I'll kind of wrap up, I call it the crayon philosophy, because we do seem to have an in-tune awareness of this with crayons. We will give kids, before they can practically hold their neck up straight, crayons on their high chair. And we know they're not going to make a picture for us. They're going to chew them, eat them, break them, toss them, do everything other than what they're supposed to be used for, which is writing and reading, or not writing and reading, drawing and scribbling. They're non-toxic because the companies know too that we're going to waste a tremendous number of packs letting them be eaten, chewed on, and thrown long before they're used for the purpose intended. We don't hold those crayons tight and assess the moment of readiness when I believe that you are ready to use this crayon for the purpose it's intended. And I like the way you've got that cookie in your mouth. Okay, you're holding it well. I'm going to go ahead and give this to you. You dropped it. You dropped the cookie. Okay, I'm sorry, we need to wait a little longer. I need to make sure you're ready for this before I give it to you. We are the gatekeeper of these skills, and we're very careful about what we give when we give them because they're supposed to be learned. Lulu didn't have to learn that AUAW. She just got to have it. That's the key. Crayons, once Lulu was picking up that crayon and using it, and she gets that, she starts by banging, sees the dots, tries to see if those dots can scribble, they do. Now she's using it for the purposes intended, and who knew what that day would be when that would happen. It happens whenever she is able and ready to catch the cause and effect. But at that moment, she has access to all 249 other crayons. Does she have to relearn that process with every color? No. They're all there now, ready for her to pull together however she should so choose. And that's what you see in the writing. You see tremendous ability to just right on the top of their head put down whatever they want to say. And it's fascinating to watch simple sight words spelled wrong. And that's a whole different thing that's a fun part that you can see in your packet. It's fascinating to see simple sight words spelled wrong when there's tremendous capability of higher level sounding out with proper choices for patterns of other things they want to write. When kids have the ability to write whatever it is they want to say because they actually own the symbols that go with the sounds so they can reread what they wrote and move on with their story, writing becomes a tremendous activity. And writing and reading are identical processes in the brain up to the point of approximately 7 or when they become automatic with these skills. This is all in one sitting. Every bit of writing that you see is one sitting. And then they can go on to centers or whatever their free activity is. This is one of many that looks like this. You'll see them online, but I can't lug this many that are this long. When kids have this instantaneous ability to have these symbols and sounds of every sound, not, like the oi. You could look at the alphabet train for eons. You're never going to find the letter that says oi because it doesn't exist. There's a whole bunch of sounds in words that kids want to write that they don't get to have access to if all they know are individual letters plus whatever sight words my teacher gave me. It doesn't make writing all that much fun. And research shows that writing and reading are identical. So writing practices reading, reading practices writing, they're one and the same. And it's such a fascinating thing to watch kids write like they talk, and then because they can go back, reread what they wrote, and move on with their story. And that is key. And experience really fine-tunes the skills, and that's a point for a longer session. But as you look at your packet, you can see this branching out into a variety of kind of down-the-road outcomes. And I will leave you with this. The most fun the kids have is not the secrets. It's what happens when they don't work. Because at the end of the day, a bookie isn't always right. And at the end of the day, you will still see a word like father that isn't AUAW in love. I said every time something happens 5 times or more. Well, that leaves that little hole of less than 5 times. But that's where the fun part starts, because the whole focus is thinking like a doctor, bringing back that analytical diagnostic, spin it around, twist it into a different direction, and see what we can come up with. That's the real focus here. We're just using reading, writing, and spelling as a vehicle to do that. That's all. The perk is they can read and write and spell amazingly. But the real crux is they're learning how to think and pattern. And that is what research shows thinking is the ability to pattern. Those that are considered the most prolific thinkers in all fields, whether it's mechanic, neurologist, musician, artist, intelligence tests that were done, they're multiple intelligences. We know all about that. You can be a brilliant mathematician and you can't spell. You could be a great writer and you can't find your car. We know that. What we don't know is, do they have anything in common? All those that are considered brilliant in their fields, the most movers and shakers. And they do. Research shows they are 3 times or greater better pattern makers than the norm, which means they see patterns where others see randomness. Now, where they see patterns depends on their capability. If I'm a great mechanic and I am a prolific mechanic and my peers have voted me such, my ability to see patterns is based on my gifts as a mechanic. But my ability to pattern is my ability to think. That's what makes me the most prolific. And whether you apply that to your gift in music or to art, we can build that ability by building their ability to pattern, looking at things and matching it up to other things and then thinking out of the box when those things don't line up. So it's a real fascinating read, and hopefully at some point, especially if any of you are going to the NAESP, I usually don't talk. This is the shortest time frame I've ever had all year. I normally get at least 2 hours, typically 3, and at the IRA national one, I got a whole 8 hours and used every minute of it. So I apologize that I kind of just did an overview, but if you go to the site and then you download your packet, it will really flesh out much of what I'm talking about. And you are welcome to email me, contact me, any questions that you have, I'll be happy to answer, and the Facebook page will answer many of them. So you are wonderful. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I went so fast.